Because the symmetry of the original function has to be replicated by the symmetry of the Fourier series, if the original function has any degree of symmetry, that will control which components are present in the Fourier series. If we take function number 1, we can see that this has no symmetry. So this means that we can't say anything about which components are present in the Fourier series, and so none of the three statements are true for this function. If we look at function number 2, we can see that this has even symmetry. Because it has even symmetry, there can be no sign components in the Fourier series, because all the sign components have odd symmetry. So we can say that for this function, Bn has to be equal to 0 for all values of n. If we look at the function further, we can see that the average of the function is non-zero. All the function lies above the x-axis. Because a0 is related to the average value of the function, we can conclude that for this function that a0 itself is not going to be equal to 0. So this means of the three statements, only the third one is true for function number 2. If we now look at function number 3, we can see that this is an odd function. Because it's an odd function, there can be no cosine components present, and so all the an's have to be equal to 0. In addition, because a0 represents the constant, and a constant is an even function, we also must have that a0 is equal to 0. So for function number 3, the first two statements are true. For the final function, function number 4, we can see that this is again an even function. And so as before, we can conclude that Bn has to be equal to 0 for all values of n. There can be no sign components in this function because signs always have an odd symmetry. If we look a bit further, we can also see for this function that the average value is equal to 0. There's as much of the function above the x-axis as there is below it. Because the average is 0, that tells us that a0 also has to be equal to 0. Because again, a0 is related to the average of the function. So for the final function, statements number 1 and number 3 are correct.